In the beginning, before the pyramids, before writing, before the first canoe slipped across a river in the Amazon, there were people. Not yet Chinese, not yet Polynesian, not yet Andean. Just people. They lived in the rocks and hills near what would someday be Beijing, in a land that trembled with mammoths and frost and the smoke of early fire. One of them, who would be called Tianyuan Man, died in a cave on a winter's day. He did not know that he was being watched by time, or that thousands of generations later, scientists would pull his bones from the earth and read his DNA like a lost scroll. Tianyuan Man, as they called him, lived 40,000 years ago. He belonged to a people just emerging from the shadows of Africa, pushing eastward toward the rising sun. His kin were explorers, hunters, and wanderers. They made tools from stone, and they were not yet divided into the peoples we now know. From his genetic code, we would learn that Tianyuan Man's people were the ancestors of many, of Taiwanese, of Southeast Asians, of the Andaman Islanders, of Papuans, and even of the first Americans. Tianyuan Man carried genetic signals that still hum quietly in the blood of modern Taiwanese aboriginals. His genes are their genes, the same strands that would travel across thousands of islands over the coming millennia, carried by women, down through mitochondrial lines labeled by scientists as B45 and B401A. These women would help populate Taiwan, then the Philippines, then all of island Southeast Asia. And long before the Polynesians reached Hawaii, long before the jungle swallowed stone cities in the Amazon, a few of these women would pass their legacy onward into a land no one expected: South America. The story moved on, as stories do, slowly, with the tides. In Taiwan, a mountain island blanketed by mist and jungle, early families carved lives in stone and jade. They lived close to the ocean, as their ancestors had done for thousands of years. Their descendants would one day be called the Austronesians, a name that would mean south wind, and would stretch across half the globe. These Taiwanese aboriginals carried with them not only memories of Tianyuan Man's people, but a peculiar kind of genetic marker, one scientists would call mitochondrial DNA B401A. It was like a signature in their maternal line, carried in the egg cells of mothers, passed down like stories told over a fire. It is this same marker that would later become haplogroup B2, found in Native Americans from the Andes to the Amazon, and while thousands of years separated the islanders of Taiwan from the tribes of Brazil, the DNA told a different tale. They were cousins, separated not by time, but by the slow drift of human footsteps over endless lands. But not all of the connections were that straightforward. Far to the south of Tianyuan Cave and east of Taiwan, in the tangled islands of Wallacea, people lived who looked different. Their skin was dark, their features sharp, their language strange and complex. These were the ancestors of today's Papuans, Melanesians, and Australian Aboriginals. And they too had once come out of Asia, perhaps alongside Tianyuan Man's people. But they had taken a different path. Along the way, they had met someone else. This someone was not human, at least not fully. In the caves of the Altai Mountains in Siberia and in the highlands of Tibet, a lost species had dwelled for tens of thousands of years. They were called Denisovans, known only from a tooth, a finger bone, and their ghostly DNA. And when the ancestors of Papuans and Australians passed through, they met these Denisovans and interbred with them. The result was a legacy. Today, Papuans and Aboriginal Australians carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA, a reminder of a night long ago when two kinds of people became one. That DNA did not stay still. It was passed from mother to daughter, father to son, carried onward with each step across the Pacific and embedded deep into the genomes of islanders and wanderers. And now, thousands of years later, something strange was found in the Brazilian rainforest. In the tangled green heart of the Amazon, among tribes like the Suruí, the Caritiana, and the Savante, scientists found a genetic echo that should not have been there. When they tested the DNA of these modern indigenous Brazilians, they discovered that some part of their ancestry matched Papuans, not East Asians, and certainly not Siberians. It was a signal that had no business being in the Americas, not if the old stories were right. This mysterious ancestry, dubbed Population Y, carried deep affinity to Australasians. It was subtle, but undeniable. The people who carried it were not direct descendants of Papuans or Australians, but rather of a population that had once shared ancestry with them, possibly from the same region of southern China, Taiwan, or Southeast Asia. It was a population that had split off from Tianyuan man's kin long before the main group of Native American ancestors had crossed Beringia. It was a ghost population, unrecorded, unburied, but not forgotten. Somehow these people, call them Proto-Australasians, call them Eastern migrants, call them the Forgotten Ones, had crossed the Pacific and reached South America. Their children's children settled in the forest, intermarried with later arrivals from Siberia, and passed on a single whisper of their heritage, a strand of DNA that matched no one else, a match to islanders half a world away. Could they have come by boat? The ocean is wide, but it is also filled with islands and currents. The Kuroshio Current flows from Taiwan through the Pacific, sweeping eastward. The South Equatorial Current bends toward the Americas, and the Lapita people, descendants of Taiwanese aboriginals, would later use canoes to cross from island to island, eventually reaching as far as Easter Island. If they could do it, perhaps others had done it before, not with navigation charts or calendars, but with instinct, stars, and driftwood. Some say it was a coastal migration, hugging the shores of Southeast Asia, then jumping from island to island along Papua, Melanesia, and Micronesia, eventually crossing the Pacific to land somewhere on the coast of Peru or Brazil. Others imagine drifting rafts carried across by storm or accident long before Columbus ever dreamed of a western sea. Whatever the path, they came. Their skulls lie in the caves of Lagoa Santa, Brazil. The crania resemble those of Australo-Melanesians, broad-faced, long-headed. For a century, scholars dismissed these features as anomalies, but the DNA now confirms what the bones already knew. These were not the children of one migration, but of many. Tianyuan man, buried under Chinese earth, never knew what would come of his people. He could not see the Austronesians rising in Taiwan, the Papuans settling the green highlands, or the children of his distant cousins slipping quietly into the Americas. He knew only the cold of the cave and the taste of cooked meat. But his legacy endures. His genome carries links to Native Americans, especially those of South America. The allele sharing between Tianyuan man and Amazonian tribes is not theoretical, it is measurable. It marks an early divergence in East Asian populations in which some branches became northern, feeding into Siberia and Beringia, and others remained southern, feeding into Taiwan, Southeast Asia, and Australasia. This split happened before the final settlement of the Americas, before the land bridge froze and thawed, before the jungle swallowed what might have been. So, when a child is born among the Surui of Brazil, or the Amis of Taiwan, or the Highlanders of Papua, she carries not only the face of her mother and the voice of her clan. She carries whispers of a world before borders, a world where Tianyuan man hunted deer near his cave, a world where women with ancient mitochondrial DNA in their cells watch the sun rise over the Pacific, a world where Denisovans, half-remembered giants, passed on something ancient and strange. And that child, living today in a hut of palm fronds or a modern city, may be the last living thread in a story that spans oceans and epochs. The story is not finished, but we are finally learning how to read it.